So this is a video demonstration on the analysis of this empathetic management data set. And so here's the numeric data. This is the scenario for our analysis. So a large insurance company wants to improve the performance of its employees by employing empathetic management techniques. These techniques emphasize the development of positive emotions in employees as opposed to fear of termination. The insurance company decides to train the managers of a 250 employee unit on the use of empathetic management techniques. So these techniques would entail the managers uh, using techniques to show to the employees that they care about the employees and that they consider the employees to be valuable, etc., as opposed to instilling fear in the employees of possible termination. The insurance company also decides to collect data about five variables, four of which are measured through multiple indicators. So they are true latent variables. Each latent variable aggregates multiple measures itself. It is believed that empathetic management will improve job satisfaction, job innovativeness, and organizational commitment. So, job innovativeness would be the ability of employees to address in an innovative way novel, unforeseen problems. The other two are self-explanatory: job satisfaction and organizational commitment. The latter is commitment to the organization that they are part of, the employees, meaning that they don't want to leave that organization. It's also believed that through the mediated effects above, empathetic management will improve job performance. So the question is, the effect of empathetic management on job performance mediated? And if yes, is the mediation full or partial? The variables are uh, answers to questions on Likert type scales. And these are scales of strongly disagree to strongly agree, and they are 1 to 7. And they are on these questions that they are all redundant questions. So the measurement in all cases here will be reflective. So, for example, for empathetic management, EM1 would be my supervisor gives me praise for my good work. EM2 would be my supervisor shows me encouragement for my work efforts. EM3, my supervisor shows concern about my job satisfaction. These are redundant questions. They are essentially all different ways of measuring a fundamental question, which is uh, does my supervisor care about me? Um, the others are also redundant. So, for example, for job satisfaction, I always feel satisfied with my job. I like my job. I do not want to change my job. Uh, non Non-redundant questions would be formative if they were non-redundant questions like the following: I like my boss. I like the city I work at. So you see, these questions would be non-redundant because you may like the city you work at, but you may not like your office. You may not like your boss. So that would be formative measurement. This measurement here that we're employing is reflective in the sense that the variables that are going to be aggregated in the latent variables. So, for example, these three, which are indicators called indicators for job satisfaction, they are similar to each other. So we expect them to be correlated, highly correlated with each other. Now, same thing with job innovativeness, organizational commitment, And for job satisfaction, we have one question, and that is provided by the managers themselves, and that's the their official performance evaluation of each employee. Now you may ask why would one to ask redundant similar questions for each latent variable? The reason for that is that you can then obtain certain measures that will allow you to test whether the respondents understood the questions in the same way that you did. That would be through loadings. Um, you could also make sure that that the respondents did not misunderstand certain questions as associated with the wrong latent variables. That would be a discriminant validity test. And finally, you would also be able to test whether the respondents understood the questions in the same way among themselves. That would be a reliability test. And you can only do those tests if you have multiple indicators per latent variable. Otherwise, you can only trust that, for example, they understood the question in the same way that you did. So in this case here, I have only one indicator for job performance. So I have to trust that the respondents, the managers, understood the question in the same way as the designer of the questionnaire did. And that is not as good as having multiple indicators. But that's how the questionnaire was designed. So that's how we're analyzing this data. So as we can see, we have three indicators for each one of the predictors and then one indicator for the criterion or main dependent variable. So with WarpPLS, first I will create a project file. I will create this project file in my downloads area, which is where I have my Excel file saved. And by the way, I can read data with WarpPLS that is not in Excel files. I can read data from text files where the data is comma delimited or tab delimited, which are the main formats that you see in addition to Excel. So I'm gonna use the same name as the Excel file for my project file. I'll just change the extension. I did not change the extension of the Excel file. I changed the extension for my project file. Now I will read my data. Now read from that Excel file. Makes a new Excel here. That empathetic management data. So I will wait for my import wizard. So here with the import wizard, I just click on next and finish. For large data sets, it may take a little longer to import. The data looks correct. It's always a good idea to check the entire data set to make sure that you don't have corruption in the data set. Sometimes that happens, and then you should not accept the data, of course, because you're going to have problems then with the data analysis. So yes, seems correct. I will pre-process the data. Here, one of the main things that the software does is to uh, look for missing values and impute them. Uh, this is my standardized data. So with standardized data, what I do is I put all of the variables on the same scale, which is a scale which is the standard deviation of each data set. So each one of these variables that is standardized has a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. And they vary typically from -4 to 4. Most of the data points will be between -2 and 2. Standardizing data has a number of advantages. One of them is that it makes the computations by the software simpler, and because of that, it increases the statistical efficiency of the software, meaning that we can get good results with small data sets. So I'll click on yes. Now I will create my model. So first I will create the job performance variable, JP, and I will measure it through a single indicator. I'll create empathetic management, the empathetic management variable, which is my main variable. And I'll create the other variables, job satisfaction. These are mediators of my relationship. Job innovativeness, JI. And organizational commitment. And I'm keeping all of them as indicated as measured as reflective under here measurement model. That's the default option. So I am testing a model that assumes that empathetic management influences job performance indirectly via these three mediator variables. So I'll create the links. And I will create one more link which will connect directly these two variables here, because one of the questions, or in the question I have, is the effect of empathetic management on job performance mediated? I will test it via the mediating effects. And if yes, that's the second section. Is the mediation full or partial? I test this by creating a direct link. And if this direct link is significant, that means that part of the mediation or part of the effect of EM on JP is not fully mediated by these three mediators, so it's partial mediation. So I will create that direct link just to be sure that the correct, I'll centralize the model, and I'll just to be sure that I have the correct indicators for the latent variables, I'll use the option show hide indicators. So as I can see, I have all of the correct indicators. So I'll save my model. And I want to conduct a linear analysis. So I will change this option here to, uh, to linear. So, and I will leave this multi-model analysis algorithm, PLS regression. I'll leave the default, which is PLS regression, which is one of the algorithms that the software provides to aggregate the indicators into the latent variables. So save analysis results. I want to get rid of this. Yeah. Okay, now I will run my analysis. Okay, so for each of the mediations to uh, exist in reality, um, both links from EM to each one of the mediators, job satisfaction, job innovativeness, and organizational commitment. So both of the links have to be significant, and they are for all of them. So, for example, from empathetic management and organizational commitment, we have a significant association, meaning that the more empathetic management is used by managers, the more commitment is to the organization is shown by the employees. And this link is also significant, meaning that the more committed the employees are, the greater is their performance. So all of them are significant. As we can see, the strongest for the two paths would be this one. So the strongest mediation is between EM and JP passing through job satisfaction. And the direct link between EM and JP is non-significant. So the p-value is greater than 0.05, which is my threshold. So I interpret this link as being non-existent because the p-value is above 0.05. So my answers to my questions, yeah, are the following. So, is the effect of empathetic management on job performance mediated? Yes, and it is mediated through job satisfaction, job innovativeness, and organizational commitment. And the mediation is full because that link is non-significant, meaning that all of the variation that is going from EM to JP, the entire effect of EM on JP is mediated. So it's full mediation. Now, as always, I have to make sure to trust these results. I have to make sure that collinearity in my model is at acceptable levels. So I will check the full collinearity variance inflation factors by going to view latent variable coefficients and checking these numbers here. And as I can see, they're lower than 3.3. There is no collinearity in my model. If any of these numbers was greater than 10, then for sure there would be multicollinearity, and then for sure I would not be able to trust these coefficients. Now, uh, let's see if uh, the respondents understood the questions associated with the latent variables, and the latent variables are these four here. True latent variables are these four because they are measured through three indicators each. So based on that information, let's see if the respondents understood the questions in the same way that the designer of the questionnaire did. So that would be a test of convergent validity. I would go to View, Indicator Loadings and Cross Loadings, in this first option here, Combine Loadings and Cross Loadings. And here the loadings are indicated within parentheses. So if they're all greater than zero point 0.5, which they are, so they are all greater than 0.7 even. But if they're all greater than zero point 0.5, that means that the respondents understood the questions in the same way as the designer of the questionnaire, which is a good thing. It tells me that my measurement model, my questionnaire, has good convergent validity. To test if the respondents did not misunderstand one or more questions as associated with the wrong latent variable, that is discriminant validity, I would have to use the option view correlations among latent variables and errors, view correlations among latent variables, and square roots of the AVEs, average variances extracted. These are shown on the diagonal, the square roots of the AVEs. And outside the diagonal, we have the correlations. And because this is a correlation table, you have this replication of results, so they're symmetrical. So for my model to have good discriminant validity, the square root of the average variance extracted For all of the latent variables, which are these, where JP is not really a latent variable. So for all of the latent variables, the square roots of the AVEs must be greater than the correlations among the latent variables. And as you can see, for EM it is because the square root of the AVE is 0.807 and the correlations are all lower than that, 0.087. The same is true for JS and the same is true for JI, job innovativeness, and also for organizational commitment. So this tells me that my model has good discriminant validity, my measurement model, the questionnaire, right? And finally, let me check to see if the respondents understood the questions um, in the same way among themselves. For that, I'll check for reliability coefficients, and that's a measure of reliability. So I'll go to latent variable coefficients, and I will take a look at this composite reliability. That's typically what I look at. And if all of these numbers are greater than zero point 0.7, in fact, a more relaxed criterion would be zero point 0.6. So if all of these numbers are greater than zero point 0.6, that means that the respondents understood the question in the same way among themselves, the questions in my questionnaire. And that only applies to the latent variables. As you can see, JP, job performance, that was measured through a single indicator. I have one, but that's not useful. It's just that I cannot calculate a reliability coefficient for that variable. But for the others that are measured through multiple indicators, I can. So that's the advantage of measuring latent variables through multiple indicators. I can then test the quality of my questionnaire. Sometimes reliability is used through the Cronbach's alpha coefficient, and again, the rule would be the same. You expect numbers greater than zero point 0.6. Normally, you would use composite reliability. So this concludes this demo uh, for the analysis of the empathetic management data set.